You are listening to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast. I'm Michael from Arizona, and with me always is my good friend
Jay from the hills of Texas.
And we're going to have to excuse AK Mike again today. He is
Playing
busy.
hooky.
I know, he's busy as a beaver. I don't know what the story is with him.
It's summer, and so he's he has
well, we
other,
are too.
interests and things that he's doing, and he's a mover and shaker, and
Yeah. Well, the main thing is that with my work schedule and Mike's work schedule and Jay's retirement schedule, it's kind of difficult to get all three of us. We usually try to plan it out, but sometimes I'm gone or he's gone or he's busy, I'm busy. So getting him in here, it's easier for Jay and I to get together to do these, and we bring Mike in when we can. So we will excuse him tonight. We love him and love it when he's on, but understand that he's got other things taking him away from that. So we'd like to welcome you to the Park Flyer Podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. But before we get started, how about a word from our sponsors?
3D Aerovitures, adding fun to the RC hobby, one layer at a time.
Feeling weak and powerless? Sounds to me like you need A-Power batteries. When someone needs the best, they always choose the A-Team. A-Power batteries. Get on the web and get yours today.
And we're back to the Park Flyer Podcast. Welcome. One of the things that I love about doing this is that we get feedback from our listeners on occasion.
Yeah. And they're not afraid to let us know.
They are not
what's on their mind.
And that stems way back from when we first started doing this. And I think our friend Doug Leroy, he kind of put the hammer to us once or twice, and we loved that and we learned from it. And I have to say that we've been doing this quite a long time, and it's always good to share our experiences, but it's always good to have someone kind of shine a light in our direction and say, hey, look, make sure you're doing things the correct way. And so I have to apologize because in my haste of talking about things, I live in a world. For those of you that don't know, I'm a full-time pilot. That's what I do for a living, and so in the in my world, it's full of acronyms. Everything has an acronym
everywhere.
If you're a pilot, then you understand a VOR or a DME or a GPS, or if you're not a pilot, you maybe understand some of those. But I literally live in this world, and so I got busy doing something, and somewhere in my head I said ASX3, and in reality it's AS3X. So we had some listeners on our Facebook page, which if you're not on our Facebook page, jump on there. We love to have you. And anyway, they pointed out the fact that we were constantly saying ASX3, and it's not. It's AS3X. It's a Spectrum product. And you know what? A lot of times we do these on the fly where, we edit them, but we can't go back and edit what we say. We could cut it out.
Yeah, that's right.
But I can't change, other would be like a blank and then, it's AS3X, it's kind of one of those bad things. And we do this kind of on our time that, we get together, and what you're seeing is live. What you're hearing is, mostly live for us at that particular moment in time. We're not in a recording studio with someone that can cut and paste and, change or go back like they do in the movies. This is pretty much what you hear is what you get. But we appreciate you pointing that out. So we will try to remember to say the proper terms. Escape was out there. I think it slipped out a couple of times, and we are trying very hard.
Can't help it.
So that actually stems from way back when. I mean, that the escape term came out of I can't remember who came up with it, but it's it's a key on your keyboard. It says ESC, and somebody just said, "Oh, you mean your escape?" And we kind of laughed at the time, and then we kind of nicknamed it. So it was mostly out of jest, but we've used it for so long as just a kind of a standing joke that it kind of caught on, and now we find ourselves doing it on the podcast.
Right. The nickname stuck.
it did stick, and it was strictly somebody else that was outside the industry that had thought about it and didn't understand what that, electrics was brand new back then, right? So we were still getting kind of out of the gas world into the electric world. So, and then the other correction that we need to do for you listeners is we had a episode where Mike, you, me, and Mike were all talking about electronic magnetic interference, right? And I think we shortened that to EFI, which in reality is electronic fuel injection. What we meant to say was EMI, which is electromagnetic interference. So with the whole podcast, we were saying EFI, and it was supposed to be EMI, and somebody actually pointed that out. So we appreciate the fact that you guys are on top of things and listening as close as you do to catch our mistakes. It's always fun to
Haters
hear.
gotta hate, Mike. Haters gotta hate.
I don't think they're hating. I think they're just pointing it out. And probably, kind of like, hey, you guys, you're supposed to say this, and you really said that. And I guess if we put ourselves out there as somewhat of experts in the field, or at least, doing what we do, I think that it's fair. So we don't get angry. We always enjoy it. And sometimes if you're lucky, we'll poke fun at you back. But yeah, please keep putting that stuff out there. We love it when our listeners respond. I will tell you that running a podcast or hosting it, sometimes you don't hear a word. It's like not a peep. You can see your uploads, downloads, that kind of thing, but you never hear back. You just wonder if anybody's actually listening or just downloading them. So the fact that people are actually going, back and forth, we just ask, honestly, that you're kind to one another, right? That's the biggest thing, is that this is a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. And if somebody, I don't want anybody jumping on someone else because they, poke the finger at us.
I really haven't seen that in the comments or no.
I'm just I haven't either, but I just want to be fair. I just kind of want to put that out there that I we kind of run this thing as with a little tongue in cheek and a little seriousness, but it is a hobby. So just be kind to one another. We're all learning, and if somebody knows something about it, then share it. If they don't, then don't drop the hammer on someone just because they came they said something to us about the way we work. It's not, we're like water off a duck's back. It doesn't bother me. It takes a lot to get us upset, I think. Matter of fact, Jay and I have known each other for so long. It takes a lot to get either one of us upset, especially when we're talking to each other. And trust me, we can get off the rails. Luckily, this is a family show, and we kind of keep it together. But normally, if you've heard our phone conversations, sometimes they can.
Or
get
if you
way
walk
out.
Past us in the store.
Or that's true too. Yeah, I've gotten myself in trouble in the grocery store with my phone in the ear talking to Jay. Luckily, it wasn't on speaker, but my comments back to him could have cost me some jail time, I think. So. Or at least a couple of scowls from some lovely young ladies or older ladies that weren't too happy with my conversation.
Most definitely.
Okay, so we'll try to keep the escapes down to a minimum, and we will try to use the correct terminology. Now, having said all that, let's talk a little bit, because there was some discussion on our Facebook page about the ASX3 or AS3X. I almost did it again. Yeah, it's very difficult because it's come out. The AS3X. And I think there was some confusion, and I think not throwing Jim under the bus, because I don't want him to feel that way, but I think there was some confusion in my explanation to Jim about what the AS3X does. And so when Spectrum came out with this product, it was really an attempt to gather more people into the hobby, because the hobby was not growing at quite the rate, and they, I think they came together and said, and this is speculation on my side, but I think they got together and said, how can we sell to the masses? Well, people don't know how to fly. Who wants to spend $350 on an airplane, go out 30 seconds later, put it in the ground? Nobody, because then it's not fun, right? So how do we design something that will help the person that doesn't know how to fly get better, or at least try to somewhat learn to fly if they don't have a coach or instructor or a club, kind of like in your instance where you just go out to the field, you're kind of on your own, right? There's nobody standing around telling you this is the way it should work. So the AS3X has a couple of different modes. For lack of a better term, the first two are like trainer modes. You can do a kind of like a trainer where I can take off, I can limit the bank angle, I can limit the pitch. And that way the airplane stays upright and it does slow turns to the left or right. It won't roll. It won't fly inverted. It won't, do anything stupid. It just flies around. And then when you come into land, you can chop the power, and the gyro portion of the AS3X kind of keeps the wings level, and then the training mode of it kind of limits things. And you can change all of that. As a matter of fact, I have an iPad and an iPhone that both have the program, the AS3X program on it, where I can, on some of mine that I have, I can just, jump in there and change the stuff right on my phone.
And I think you can get a dongle and you can do it like through Bluetooth.
You can. Mine is Bluetooth.
I remember seeing something like that. So they had a couple of different ways you can get in there and mess with the software or upload or turn off features. So, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, it's one of those things that, the training modes are built to help people learn to fly. And I think in Jim's case, he may have been thinking that he did the trainer mode. And there are certain, ways to set it up. The second part of the training mode allows you, it's called an advanced mode, and it will allow you to do really cool stuff like loops, rolls. So once you get used to flying the airplane and you're comfortable with it, you can switch the mode, and then you can start learning aerobatics, right? You can do all those fun things that people go out there and do either accidentally or on purpose, and still recovery. Still fly it and recover it and land it. So you can flip between those two modes. The third mode is a strictly a recovery mode, and I think you can program all of those into your radio, or you can turn one on and the other one off. They do give you a pretty wide range of things that you're allowed to do. So you just have to kind of get into the manual and kind of program things the way you want it. Well, in Jim's case, he had programmed just the recovery mode. And so when we were talking on the podcast, when I was at your place, we were talking about flying with Jim, those were the things that I was trying to discuss, that the fact that there wasn't a training mode set up. It was only the recovery. So when you click the button, or in his case, a switch, then the switch stayed in the recovery mode. It never came out. You had to literally flip the switch back off, which was a little disconcerting for, I flipped the switch and then went to go make a turn, expecting it to do a shallow turn in the training mode, and it was not in the training mode. So it didn't do anything but just fly straight. There was stick-wise, couldn't do anything. So I had to flip that switch out. Remember which, I'm flipping switches, finally got it back. So, it's, there was some discussion, I think, too, on, a couple of the guys were talking about learning to fly without it. I think you and I were in the realm of learning to fly without any gyros at any given time, because when we first started, there were no gyros.
Oh, yeah. Heck no.
At least not for our little flyers, right? Park flyers,
Nope.
Who put there were for the big jets. I will tell you that those gyros have been around for, some time, and there's newer ones out. But they did have a couple of companies for flying the larger jets because they're super fast, and you want them to be, somewhat stable. So what? I guess this is a pretty good discussion on gyros themselves. But what do you think the gyro's for? Because I hear you talk about it all the time, but kind of give me what your thought process is about. I mean, what do you use it for?
Well, it depends on the aircraft that I'm using, right? So, like for the reason I like the gyro in Jim's smaller F9 EDF is that, it's a smaller, 50, 55, 60 millimeter EDF jet. And unfortunately, when they're that small, they're very twitchy, right? So if it's dead calm, the plane flies, the gyro off, the plane flies perfectly. It flies fine. Mm-hmm. You get a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind in there, gusting a little bit, and that little plane becomes not a super handful, but, for somebody who's just learning EDFs, it can be a little disconcerting for some of the stuff that it can do. Now,
there's something very important about that airplane.
What's that?
That makes the gyro definitely worth it. And what is the one thing missing on that plane?
Oh, it doesn't have a rudder.
It doesn't have a rudder. That is correct. So any type of wind, the airplane's going to start rocking back and forth. Now, the gyro doesn't have a rudder input in there, but it definitely does kind of stabilize it. You're still going to get a little side-to-side motion, but the ailerons and they stay a little bit ahead of the game.
Well, it dampens everything, right?
It does dampen it
It
all.
just smooths the
Correct.
plane out. It dampens it. You're not as susceptible to that little bit of a sharp wind that comes up, which might jeer you over to the left or right. You may start that, but you don't have to. It's already recovered by the time your brain's just processing what's happened, right?
Correct. Yes, that is correct. And that's that's one of the things that we're kind of talking about in this gyro is that in my eyes it's kind of funny because I learned to fly without gyros and I learned to fly without expo. So that in my eyes, when you start flying smaller airplanes like little park flyers, if you can fly the airplane with no gyro, no expo, high rates, right? You get a little bit less jumpy on the sticks. And what I mean by that is you're not banging the sticks around. Because I think in this trainer mode with this AS3X, you can flap you can peg the sticks out and the airplane won't do anything, which is terrible in my eyes, right? You want to bang the sticks around. You want to be smooth as glass. And if you watch me fly, which is one of those things that Jim was talking about, I mean, I think the last time there he complimented me. He's like, wow, this guy's so smooth. It's because I hardly move the sticks. I mean, unless I'm flying 3D, which is a totally different deal, so we'll take that out of it. But if I'm flying a jet, a Warbird, EDF, just a normal, like just even a J3 Cub, my big Cub, I'm not banging sticks left and right, twanging them, that kind of thing. It very rarely leaves the center. So if I needed to make a turn or climb, I just put a little bit of input in there until I'm done with the input and then put it right back. And the gyro, in my particular case, I use a Demon Cortex for a lot of my airplanes. And this isn't a plug for Demon, but I like them because they don't have as strong of what is called latching. They don't have as strong latching as some of the other gyros. And the latching part for me is really troublesome on some of these a little bit less expensive gyros, meaning that it comes back. Now, you can tune a lot of that stuff out of there, but for me, when it grabs the airplane again, it has a tendency to be a little harder at it, and my Demons actually soften that up. Now, that's not the main reason. The main reason is because I can use them as a receiver.
Oh, that's true. Well, yours is ultra fancy, as opposed to like what Jim's using. I think
Sure.
he has a Lemon. That thing's, it's pretty simple, but it isn't. I mean, it allows you to, you can assign one of your not your switches, but one of your rotary knobs to take your gain in and out of it remotely, which is really neat if you set it up that way. So you can fine tune your, because on one of my older gyros, I go up there and fly and the plane's super twitchy and I'm like, whoa, I have too much gain in the gyro. And I would land, get on my really teeny tiny,
microscopic
screwdriver, and I'm in there trying to see, and once again, I'm older, so I got to have glasses.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to see this little thing, which the gyro's up in such an angle, and I'm in this impossible thing with my sausage fingers. Yeah. And that, that's a bit of a pain. And now, most of them come with, this, when you set it up, you can assign one of your rotary switches to do your gain. So now you can sit there and you can figure out your gain while you're flying. And then you can save that gain, and fly and have no problems. Or you could, disable that rotary switch so that, later on, you don't fly for a month or two, and then you forget, that you had gain in there, and you're messing with your knobs, and you turn the gain went up, go up and fly, and you're like, whoa, my gosh, what's wrong with this thing? But anyway, it's pretty neat what these newer, what these newer gyros can do. And once again, they're, in the size of something like this.
Yeah,
that's
postage stamp
receiver
size.
and everything. That's the amazing thing.
Well, I know that on our Facebook page there was some discussion on, whether you should use one or learn to fly with one, not. I am all about learning to fly with the least amount of crutches. I don't want to say crutches. That's the wrong term. The least amount of automation. That's a better term to put it, right? So you can automate a lot of things, but if you're learning to, and in my particular world, I'm both a certified flight instructor for real airplanes, and I'm also an AMA instructor for new people. And what I have found is that it's a lot better to learn the basics on something simple than to jump into some complex, type
Sure.
individuals. So, or some complex, type structure or airplanes or, just the learning curve. So if you have, I think E-Flight or somebody has, a little Cub or, Taylorcraft or whatever that they have. And it's a fairly easy high wing training airplane. And I've flown guys with it, where they're on a buddy box or what have you. And it's easier to give them instruction, with that. And the I've done it with the AS3X. I've done it without it. And in the buddy box, normally I let people go as far as they can before they finally go, oh, I don't have it, and then I can take over and usually recover. But even with Jim, when I was flying with Jim, it's easier for me to say, hey, I turn the gain down and allow them to learn to fly it so that they're not moving the sticks around. And that way it's not a crutch, right? They're not banging left or right to get the airplane to do one or the other. And I'm busy saying, okay, just let go, right? Let go there, Yoda. And Luke.
Well,
and,
because once again, it's a different, Jim's biggest thing is he's trying to calibrate his eyeball, right? So he's got, decades of experience on regular planes, but going to this EDF stuff,
that's new.
It's a different time zone, right?
Sure.
You're in a different time frame for how they, how fast they fly, what happens with them when they fly. And it takes a little while to just get calibrated flying them. And with having a gyro, to me, even though it may be a crutch, but having that gyro, it's one less thing for them to, once they trust the gyro, it's one less thing for them to think about while they're getting their head and eye and time kind of calibrated to what the situation is, right? Because they're not like, oh my gosh, I got to, it's kind of like learning how to drive for the first time, I remember when I came back, my mom asked me, well, where'd you go? And, what was going on? And I'm like, I have no idea. I was staring at the center line the whole time. I don't know.
When I'm driving on the white line.
I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea that I passed a fire truck that was on fire going down the, the highway. I didn't see it.
Exactly.
So to me, it's kind of like that. He's busy figuring out what's going on, trying to listen to you, even though you're buddy boxing with him. But now he has something, that's helping him as you're trying to explain how to set the plane up at altitude to get ready for a landing, and what to do with the throttle as opposed to your altitude, and that whole mind shift. Having to him trying to constantly pull up or pull to keep the plane level or to gain altitude, and you're like, hey, you can control that just with the throttle. And he's like, what? So it's just one of those things. It's something to take one less thing out of his hands for the time being. And then later on, like you said, you can start dialing things down where, it's not so much of a crutch once he gets his head calibrated for flying EDFs. So that's what I like about it.
Well, one of the things I've noticed, having flown no gyro and actually having, seen guys that have flown with none and then they fly with it or they fly without it, some of the new guys, and this happens in the real world too, which is why it's so familiar to me. But people get, in the real world, they get ground rush. They're sitting in the airplane, the ground starts getting closer to them, and they start going, whoa, 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 and they start pulling back, right? And the problem is it's not a smooth transition. It's an instant, it's a jerk, right? They go, huh, and the airplane responds to that. Because it's like, like you said, you're watching the white line. Well, they're watching dials and, speeds, and they're trying to flaps and all that other crap that's going on. And then all of a sudden they look up and the runway's like right there. And it's not a panic, but it's all of a sudden like, whoa, and they jerk the stick back, and of course the airplane reacts. And then as an instructor, I'm like, oh, let's not be so jerky on the controls. Well, when I do it in the RC world, I see guys that are flying. They fly beautifully. Jim flies beautifully, comes down to land, gets 4 feet off the ground, and sees that the airplane's about to smack the ground and instantly jerks the stick, and now the airplane stands on its tail.
Right.
And sorry, Jim, I'm not throwing you under the bus. It didn't happen to him. I'm just saying that in general, all of a sudden now the airplane's in a nose-up position, and now the airplane's bleeding off speed at a ridiculous rate, and what's going to happen next. The airplane's going to get to where it exceeded the critical angle of attack, and it's going to stall, and now the wing rolls over, and it's a full-on panic. What do I do? How do I save this airplane? And not in Jim's case, but just in general, right? So it's difficult for people who are learning to not have this instant, jerk reaction. And I think the gyro solves that problem, because the airplane now actually is in a controlled descent, right? It's not, even if you were to jerk back on the stick a little bit, if you've got the right gain setting, the airplane's only going to move a little bit. And
Right.
and so it's almost like flying a computer rather than flying an actual, control surface. And in the real world, the Airbus 320 is a fly-by-wire. And you can jerk the stick back as hard as you want, and the airplane's going to go, okay, well, that's not really, you really didn't want that, right? You wanted this, and it'll give you a nice smooth transition where you just peg the stick into your lap. And so I think that the gyro helps out in that particular, at least in my experience watching the guys fly them and training with some of these guys, that's what it does, is it helps you not be so jerky on the stick. Now, you can still jerk it, but it'll soften, dampen what you used the term before. It'll
Exactly.
dampen some of that. And in Jim's case, I heard you say it, and I've said it to him, you got to trust it, because the gyro's not going to do anything. It's constantly trying to keep the airplane in wings level, kind of forward motion thing, moving forward. So it's not going to roll over on its back. It's not going to do anything ridiculous unless you do that. But one of the terms that I used for Jim the last time, and he's an actual pilot as well, so he kind of understood this. But I've used this terms with non-pilots, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" But it's called arresting the sink rate, right? You want to arrest the sink rate. So rather than, I hear people all the time, I've heard other instructors at our club where they talk about, they go, okay, well, pull back on the stick. Unfortunately, in my eyes, that's a wrong term, right? Because when you say pull back on the stick, that's from 0 to hero. Boom. I got 100% in there,
Right.
and that's the
Right.
wrong thing to do, right?
Wrong terminology.
Right. And so what I try to do is talk to people about arresting the sink rate. Now, you can do that one of two ways. You can arrest the sink rate with power, or you can arrest it with elevator. So if you come back a little bit on the elevator and the airplane's getting to a nose up, the only other option is to continue to pull back and stall the airplane, or add power to get more airflow over the wings, which will give you more forward flight than downward flight. So it's a little bit of a trajectory. And I think, when I was talking to Jim out at the field when I was there, when I used those terms, he kind of understood it. And I was telling him, just bump the power a little bit. That will arrest your sink rate. So now you're not coming at the ground, at this incredible fast speed. And but even if you are, I think the gyro at that point is going to at least keep your wings level. You're not going to cartwheel it. You may pancake it, but you're not going to cartwheel it down the runway. So anyway, long discussion over it, because I know there was some discussion on our Facebook page about, people, whether they should use it or whether they shouldn't. And I think it's a great tool. If you learn to fly without it, I do think that, you're one of the few guys. I fly with them all the time. And what it does for me is make it feel like more of a real airplane feel, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because I fly, large transport category airplanes, and I fly small airplanes. And I know that the faster in a small airplane, especially if it's cable driven, the faster you go, you get some resistance, air resistance on the controls. And a gyro gives me that feel. So when I go to turn, it actually feels like I have air resistance on the ailerons. Now, on a big airplane, it's all in springs because they're fly-by-wire. So there is no resistance. It's 3,000 PSI of, hydraulic fluid out there moving your control surfaces, and you're not doing anything but telling the computer what to do. So they actually put a spring inside the control yoke to give you what they call a feel. So when you go to turn, it feels heavy. It doesn't feel like it's just like, like you're driving a kiddie car. It actually feels like you're turning this big airplane, and it's a feel. So the gyro for me, even though I have it turned way down, I will turn it down and then work myself up till I get that same feel that I would in a bigger, normal, real aircraft. So for me, coming from a real pilot, or a professional pilot to an RC guy, that's really what I think, if I had to explain it, or if the guys on Facebook are listening, and they want to talk about it, that's fine. But in my eyes, that's really what a gyro does, is that, I've flown some airplanes that are just like, hold on, and yet if you put a gyro in it, it feels more like an actual kind of real airplane. But that's just my opinion. please jump on the web and let us know what you think or how you feel. I'm more than willing to listen to your side of the story.
What I really love about when having a gyro in a plane when you have it all dialed in, and that is landing.
Mm-hmm.
You could have where your landings are kind of iffy and a little bumpy, but something about having a gyro in your plane, and then all of a sudden you start making these amazing landings, and boy, does that does a lot for your confidence.
It does. It gives you a lot of confidence, but it also slows you on the sticks, right? Because you're not bumping it. You're not being like oh. Because when you pull back on the stick, the nose goes up, nose goes up, and you're trying. All you're doing is making this smooth transition to a nose up, to where you're just in. As soon as I have the nose in the landing configuration, I don't want to go any higher than that. I want to stay right there, and then I can just bump the throttle if I need it, and then just come in and land. Guys at my field, not toot my own horn, but guys at my own field are always amazed that I can land on the center line and so smoothly. And I'm kind of like, I don't understand the mentality behind that, but then I watch everybody else fly, and it's yeehaw cowboy, hold on and, bounce it down the runway kind of thing. And I'm like, you could get rid of all of that stuff. And they always blame the wind or, it was crazy, something else. It wasn't them, and it's always technique. But I don't know. It's just the way I learned to fly without any of the gyro or the expo or anything. And when I did find those, I was like, whoa. So, I was doing pretty good at landings before all that. And like you said, 10 hours a day on the simulator didn't hurt any. So, either. So, because I would actually, every night when I came home from work, I'd jump on there and spend at least an hour doing takeoff and landings in my RC airplane on real flight. So, I got really good at
Like I said, the only thing that has me that I don't like so much is like the crescendo that I did a Scott's plane. And we didn't, once again, it wasn't a really good thermally day. It was more of, we were just flying it like a plane and, scooting and going and stuff. But, it was fine. It was fine for that. Or once again, if you were a beginner, the nice part is that plane will just fly right out of your hand, for taking off. And, I think for a beginner, once again, that it would be beneficial for having all the different modes in that particular plane. But as for when I actually tried to, glide the plane and was trying to look for thermals, I was like, I'm not finding anything. And then I thought about it and I go, well, of course not, because I can't see any reaction.
For
the glider.
Right. It's dampening
because,
all that out.
Hey, the right wing, when it hits a little bit of warm air, no, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. The gyro corrects for that.
The right wing goes up and then it pushes it, next thing you know, it's nice and level. So it was, it was one of those things you had to get into a whole mass of warm air, and then you'd see the whole glider go up, would rise, and you go, there's warm air, there's warm air there.
Right.
That was the only way I could tell what was going on.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're right. Mess. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So that was I think that was the one thing that him and I were talking about, was we hadn't set it up on the radio, but we were trying to figure out, can you turn off the the gyro off once you got up there, type of thing. And we never figured, it's one of those things we never got around to figuring that out, but that's one of those things, if we could turn it off, then that would be great. But from what I heard, you really can't turn it off.
Right. So. I think you can turn it way down, but I don't think you can turn it all the way off. I think it's part of the software. So, well, while we're talking about that, I got to fly with Jim when I was down there for, the 4th of July day. And then I'm back in Phoenix now. But he did an amazing repair job. We dinged up the nose gear when we were down there, right? And
the first day,
and he brought it back, and it was a great repair. He did a really fantastic job, and I took him for a couple of flights, and I took you for a flight, and we wound up on your flight. You did great, except at the very end, you just got a little slow, and as the nose touched, you pulled back a little bit more on the stick, and the nose dropped, and when it dropped, it grabbed a big clump of grass and bent the steering mechanism on the gear. And I don't remember us talking about that on the last podcast, but that did happen, and so it kind of ended the A10 flying. But I had to go, and then I get a text from you, and obviously you guys were able to go back out to the field. So
so once again, on that particular break, I thought the strut was just a little bit bent, Jim had attempted while we were at the field because he wanted to fly some more.
Sure.
One of the
Well,
things
I mean, it's a new airplane, no way.
batteries. So he wanted to fly it again. So he was trying to bend it back in shape. And when he was bending it, and the way the steering mechanism goes, there's a little rod that kind of comes off, off the strut, which is the actual steering mechanism that gets pushed by the servo.
Right.
Well, it kind of got a little fatigue crack in it. And of course, it was right there at the angle where he was trying to bend the thing straight again, and it was getting more bent. And it was just one of those things. The more you touched it or looked at it,
like a paper clip bending back and forth.
Yeah,
it starts turning a
and
different
it wasn't
color,
like it was bent
Hey.
back and forth. It just was the hardness of the metal.
Right.
It was it's just a like
it's a
paper
tiny
clip,
rod.
like thickness.
Yeah.
And that thing just kind of snapped, and it was like, well, maybe we can get it to fly. And we're like, yeah, the minute it touches a blade of grass, thing's gonna break. And sure enough, just kind of sitting there and just kind of touching the wheel, it ended up breaking off. So the flying was done. And I'm sitting here looking at this particular rod, and it's not just a rod the same thickness all the way through. It's kind of like a
tapered
rod, and then it goes into another piece of aluminum rod, and so it's like they're press fit into each other, and the other rod's a different thickness than the rod that's pressed into it that goes to the servo.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh man, how's Jim gonna fix this? Because unfortunately, you can't get parts for this plane. It's so new. There just aren't.
There's not a whole lot available.
Spare parts made.
Right.
Yeah, nothing's available. Nothing's coming until August 2024. Type of thing.
Right.
So he's sitting there like I was just like, how are you going to fix this? I mean, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't know. Now his fix from before was pretty ingenious because he was looking for a pin. It was a relatively easy fix for the part that he broke before, like after you made in his plane. But the problem was you couldn't get these pins, and he was looking through his trunk drawer that he has, all his plane parts in. He got what's that thing called? It's a pin. It's a cotter pin. It's like a big giant cotter pin. That you put on like a farm implement. But
Right.
it was the same diameter, like 3 millimeters or whatever. And he was able to cut off the chunk that he needed. He was able to take his Dremel and lightly score it around the top so he could put the E-clip back into it to hold on. Once it was back in the strut, it was an amazing fix. So it was, for such a small, delicate part, he did a great job. So anyway, for this other brake for the actual steering that went to the servo, as he was looking at this, he was able to take it all apart, and the part that connected to the strut was an aluminum piece, and he was able to grab a piece of threaded rod, a 440 rod, right? Mm-hmm. And he noticed that, it just barely, it fits in this hole that, like I said, like it went from a thick piece to a thin piece. So he was able to thread the 440 rod into the aluminum. It was, the aluminum was just soft enough that he was able to thread it into it.
Oh, wow.
By doing it very slowly back and forth, and he was able to tap it. Using this 440 rod, and then he undid it, bent it how it was supposed to go, attached it to the servo, bink, worked fantastic.
Wow.
And I was like, once again, truly amazed. Also, he had to make another pin because it's sitting on this shaft that this collar slides up and down as the servo, goes up and down, and so it travels along this thing. And so he was looking for a pin that was the same diameter, and he couldn't find anything. So he got on Amazon, and I think I got a picture of it. I'll put it on the YouTube version.
Okay.
But he got a little box that has all these different stainless steel pins, and he was able to find a pin that fit, whipped out the old Dremel, was able to reshape it, make an exact copy of it, put it in there, and everything worked, and it was a really, really, really neat fix.
Wow.
Because there's no parts. And basically he scoured the internet, or I should say RC groups, until he came across one reference that somebody said, hey, use this discontinued part from, I think, like Motion RC, plane.
Sure.
This landing gear fits should be a replacement for the other one, and it is. It's the same size and everything, but of course the plate that you would normally screw into the aircraft, you put 4 bolts into it and attach it to the actual plane. The one he got from Motion RC is way smaller, so the holes don't line up. So basically, if he does have to use it in the future, he's going to have to make like a plywood plate of the original, and then cut out a square that he's able to put the new gear on top of and screw that down. Sure. So if that's in the future, if that part happens to break. But anyway, great fix, right? So he's all proud and looking at it, and he's like, "Man, I did a great job," which he did. And then he kind of looks down, and he powers it all up, and he's cycling everything, and it's working, and he's all right. And then he hears a whirr in the right wing, and he's like, "What is that noise?" And he looks down, and the right aileron is askew. Oh. So he reaches down there, and he starts chattering more as he's kind of trying to move the servo or figure out what's wrong with it. The gear is broken. It's got a broken plastic gear. And he's like, "How did that happen?" Yeah. He's sitting on the bench. He has no idea when the gear broke. So he's just like, ugh. So he's looking around, and I guess he found some metal geared servos that he was going to put in there. And so he goes, "Okay, this is easy. They're same size, 9 gram, 10 gram. So I'll just swap them out." Goes to swap them out. Of course, he can't just swap them out because the leads that go through the wing, they're really, really long. And so he didn't want to take the whole plane apart to find all the leads and plug everything in. If his servo was the same length, the servo lead length was the same, he had no clue. So he just kind of clipped off the bad one, clipped off his, did some minor soldering, got it all to work. And he's like, whew. So he gets it all together, once again, puts the head back on the servo, sticks it back in the hole, attaches everything, and he goes to move everything, and both the servo arms are going the same direction. They're not going opposite like they normally do.
Sometimes reversed.
And he's like, is this servo reversed? Is the servo I bought reversed, or was the servo I just took out of there reversed?
Right.
And so that let him down for a quagmire for like the next 2 days as he was trying to figure out which servo, if a servo was reversed, if the reverser was somewhere buried deep in the actual wing of the plane, So he's like trying to reference things. So he's going nowhere, and he calls me up, and we kind of brainstormed for it for a little while. And I just said, "Well, Jim, I had another plane. I had a similar problem. And it was just easier to hog out some foam, out of the where the actual servo goes. Just hog out.
Yeah. Just the other side. You flip it over
and just flip it over and put it back in there. Right. And you'll be fine. And that's what he ended up doing in order to get it to work. So
I'm interested. Did the servo have brushless motor? Because if it did, he could have just soldered.
I can't answer that question. I really don't. We would have to look up what servos were in there, and I have no idea.
Well, if it's a brushless motor, you can just resolder the 2 wires. Then it runs the other way.
Yeah, once again, I don't doubt that, but I just don't have the information because I didn't ask Jim any of that stuff at the time. So. Well,
I know on my A10 when you order parts or another new servos for my big A10 that you are ordering 2 of them on the other side that are reverse servos.
Right.
So I know that one of them, they're all facing the same direction, and one of them, like the flap servo is opposite. They're like looking at each other, and that one is actually that one's a reverse servo. So I don't doubt that he probably bought one and it was reversed when he took it out, but actually not reversed going in. So that makes
when
sense.
Put it back in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or the new one was not a reverse.
By hook or by crook, he was able to, he fixed it all, put it all back together, put up tape, repainted it, looked great.
Right.
When I looked at the repair, once again, I couldn't tell that he had, hogged out foam, stuck everything back in there. It looked fine.
Right.
So a great repair. And so, like I said, we got together sometime just a little while ago this week, right, or last week, and we went out and we remade the aircraft. So.
Oh, good.
Which kind of leads us into another segue of a safety minute. Now, if you remember the last safety minute that we had, which was if you're working on an electric plane or a
Yes.
drone, always
off
take
the
the
prop.
props off.
That is correct.
Take the props off, then mess with it, and get your electronic speed controller right, and do whatever you have to do, or figure out what the brake's doing. But take the prop off, right? That was the last one, and reason why, I ended up almost chopping my finger off.
Right.
So this time, I will say, always do your safety checks, and that's the moral of the story, I guess. Safety checks are key. So in this little tale, it's amazing. I think when I was talking to you about this earlier. So I used to, when I was in the Air Force long eons and eons ago, I used to work in a safety office. And out of the thousands of safety stories or mishaps that I read about, there were very, 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 very few, something from God came down and, the controls froze or they fell off. I mean, that rarely ever happens. It's more like one of those Rubberg puzzles. Somebody does something out of sequence. Somebody drops a screwdriver. Somebody's showing somebody a picture of their kid and forgets to tighten a bolt, and then this crazy sequence of events happens to an accident.
Yeah, it's a string of errors. A string of errors.
It's a string of errors, right?
Yeah.
So in this particular little saga, Jim had been working on this plane all week. All week, it took him, or the weekend, for him to figure out what was going on with these servos.
Right.
And he finally cracked the code, got them all situated, put them back in the plane, tested them, put them back in the plane, repainted the plane, and here we are at the field.
Right.
Now, so in walks me. I'm going to be the pilot to maiden the plane. My main focus at that time, because when you flew the plane, Jim has some of his switches in different places than where you and I would put the switches. Okay.
That's correct.
And so I was a little concerned about that because where he has his gear switches on the other side of the radio, and and the same with the flap switch and some other things. So I was like, oh man, so I'm sitting here studying the radio to make sure, flipping things to make sure I can get it in my head that flipping this and flipping that, turns this on, turns that off. And on top of that, he had the switch that turned on the safe mode. And he's like, oh yeah, and this switch, when you flip that, it turns on that safe recovery mode. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to touch that switch.
Yeah, that's the no-no switch. I'm
picking up the radio and I'm holding it, trying to get a hold of it so that normally I kind of hold it where I have my fingers are touching the switches that I'm going to be using. Right. So now I'm trying to, that particular switch is one that I always touch. I usually always have it for something that I use. So now I'm trying to deprogram myself to not touch that button, and I'm like, okay, don't touch that switch. Don't touch that switch. And I'm like picking it up, and I'm just, that's what I was sitting there studying, because I knew if anything was going to happen when I flew the plane, it was going to be because I touched the wrong switch.
Okay,
so I did not want to cause this.
So just to bring everybody up to speed in the short time we have, this is your first chance at the, I should say, pilot and command side. You're now you're on the buddy box, because when I was there,
we're on the buddy.
I was the master, you were the buddy, and now this time
That's right.
you're the master, and Jim's going to be the buddy. So you're about to take off and then let Jim go fly the airplane. So you were in control.
Yes.
All right, just getting the story straight.
So once again, that was my focus, right? So I'm just focused on making sure I understand his radio, and I'm not going to make a mistake and things like that. So we get out there, and we're on the table, and he's plugging it in and getting everything plugged in. And one thing I noticed, that when Jim plugged the radio in, the gyro has to go through its initialization sequence. And usually when it does that, you don't want to touch it. You don't want to look at it. You don't want to do anything with it. So I noticed that Jim he plugged it in, and then he started trying to tuck all the wires in. So he's tucking wires in. He's moving the plane all around while it's trying to initialize. And so it finally initializes. And then Jim had picked it up, taken it off the table, put it on the ground. And I go, Jim, can you grab that plane and put it back on the table, and what we're going to do is we're we're going to reinitialize it because you were trying to either you got to get in the habit to just plug the power in, let it initialize, then you can tuck all the wires in, before you do the plane. So you just kind of get a sequence of how you're going to do this. So he's like, oh, okay. So he unplugs the plane, replugs the plane back in, it initializes, he puts it all together. Now, also part of this, Jim had some surgery on his foot, and his wife told me not to let Jim walk around too much. So at that point, I give Jim the radios, I grab the plane, and I walk out into the middle of the field. Then I walk back, I meet Jim back at the edge of the field with the radios, take the radio, and then I kind of do a semi-function check from the field back to where Jim is. So I'm checking all my parts, all my radios, and I'm like, okay, great. Everything seems to be fine. So I kind of go through my sequence with the radio, trying to figure things out. In my mind, I kind of go through trying to touch the switches, and I'm like, okay, everything's good. I think we're good. Okay, here we go. Right. So now we're ready to take off. Now, Mike had told me when he flew the plane, one of the problems that it had, especially on this grass runway, was that you had to have full stick back, back pressure on the stick to alleviate the bounciness on the nose gear, or else the nose gear takes a lot of punishment. Now, Jim had also modified the nose gear, took out a little bit of the spring so it wasn't as stiff and it had a little bit more give, and that made a world of difference. Okay, so anyway, I have I have full back pressure on the elevator. I give it full power. It's tracking straight. Everything's looking good, and I'm real conscious because I'm looking for, once that nose gear breaks the ground and the plane gets light, I want to release the back pressure on the plane and just let the gyro kind of take control and fly on out. And man, the takeoff was beautiful. It broke. I could see it getting light. It broke. Didn't bounce into the air or anything. The next thing I know, as it breaks and kind of flies off, I'm like, woohoo! And I'm like, I'm just watching it fly out, and I'm like, all right, perfect. It didn't wreck anything. No parts or pieces are falling off. And so the on that particular direction in the field, you kind of turn right and start heading towards the trees and make your turn and come back. And so as I make my right, I start to brake to make my right turn, and as I do, the plane starts going to the left. And I'm like, that's weird. The plane's going to the left. Why is the gyro doing that? So I give it a little bit more right, and then it starts going more to the left. And the next thing I know, I'm
wow.
Within half a second, I got the stick buried into the corner on the right to counteract what it's doing going to the left. Well, the plane flips over on its back, flies for a little bit, then, comes down and hits the ground gently. It doesn't go nose first or anything, but it just lands on top of the canopy, and then it breaks into a couple of big pieces, and some foam flying all over the place. And I'm just sitting there with my mouth agape because this wasn't like 30 seconds. This quite literally was within 8 to 10 seconds that this all happened, and I'm just like, what happened? And then it hit me. The controls were reversed. I could just tell by just the sequence of what happened. I was inducing the plane turning like that, So sure enough, I walk up and the power's still on. The nose is kind of broken off. I kind of pick up those pieces. I take them back. I get the radio. The back of the plane's fine, but the canopy and that whole front top part of the aircraft is kind of all broken apart. But it's, once again, big pieces, so it's repairable. So anyway, I hear buzzing from the front nose gear, steering gear, which was very disappointing because it's obvious that they just use plastic gear servos for that, which I really thought was kind of, for a plane that you're going to be flying on grass fields or, an A-10, you'd want to have metal gear for the steering for this particular plane. But anyway, sure enough, I get up there, I start moving the sticks on the radio, and I'm just like, oh boy, everything's reversed. It is reversed. There's nothing we can do about it. That, and then I'm just kind of like, I cannot believe that I did not do my function check. I skipped right over it. And I just, in the back of my mind, I was so worried about the radio that when we went to do the function check, I'm like, Jim's checked this plane over 50 bazillion times this weekend. He's, getting all the parts in. Well, unbeknownst to me, when Jim was putting everything together, he had the plane upside down. So to him, everything was working properly, but he wasn't really even thinking about it. So it was just a comedy of errors of, his build, but really I should have caught that as the pilot in charge, and I didn't because I failed to do my function check. So, yeah, it didn't go so well.
Well, dude, that is totally sucks. And unfortunately, and I totally get what you're saying, because being the pilot in command, you're responsible. You're the one signing for it.
Absolutely,
you're doing it all.
I felt so bad, especially after all that hard work he did to repair the plane.
Yeah.
And and even though he might have put the things in backwards,
right.
It really doesn't matter because I was the guy.
Right.
Had I just done that function check like I always do.
You and I have had a similar issue though.
And said, hey, those are in backwards.
Yeah, we had a similar issue when the F-15, when you were down here and we built that GWS F-15, we took it to the park. We had exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
You were busy doing something. Yeah. I was doing something. I was a PIC. I was like, okay, left, right, left, right, left, right. You were like, yep, let's go. And it was one of those where I was left and said right, and you go, yep. And then I was right and said left. So it was, I was like left, right, and I pushed the stick the wrong way. But it was because I said that, and you were standing with your back to me. Yeah, that works. So it is one of those things that, the safety minute for the day is that you should always do your flight control checks. And I will tell you that on a real airplane, it's in every checklist on every airplane I've ever flown, and I have flown a ton.
There's a reason for that.
And there's a reason, because you want to make sure they're going in the right direction. And if they're not, this is one of those times that in my head, we just got finished talking about trust your gyro. And yet, at the same token, and I'm going to be in Jim's corner for this one because we're going to beat up on you, but in the same token, that has a gyro. If you would have just let go of the sticks, it probably would have stayed doing what it was supposed to do and righted itself.
Oh, yeah, no. Had I not touched anything, it just would have flown off.
Right.
And maybe I could have figured it out that something was amiss.
Right.
But like I said, I was just, I was going in that initial how we take off from there, and then you go ahead and you just start making that right-hand turn. You pop the gear up and all that kind of stuff. I was just about to start flipping switches, and that thing just started rolling to the left. I went, what?
Yeah.
That's not right.
That's crazy. Well, the good news is it didn't damage most of the airplane, though, right? It just, you kind of dinged up.
Yeah, it's so this is what I told
fixable,
Jim.
I should say.
It's fixable, right? And so he's going to end up making an A10 bastard. So it ain't going to look pretty.
Sure.
But honestly, if he can fix it, and I offered to fix it if he didn't, if he wasn't going to, but he said he was going to go ahead and work on it over the weekend. But if he fixes the plane, like I said, it won't look pretty, but it'll be functional, and therefore there will be no pressure left on that plane.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You guys can fly it like you stole it.
So I told him, I said, well, I guess you may be getting a birthday gift. When's your birthday? He's like, oh, not until February. And I go, well, maybe an early Christmas gift.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll buy him a new fuselage,
right.
and then so we can beat this thing to death, get it all tweaked out, fly it. And then get him a new fuselage, and then make it look pretty. And now we'll have the whole flying, all the bugs out of it.
Well,
so
there you
that's
go.
what I'm
hoping. That's
because the wing was fine. The wing was fine. The rudders were fine. The rest. So basically, right. Most of those planes break right where the canopy joins up with the.
Well, that's the weakest part.
Wing strut. That root area. So.
Well,
anyway.
I'm sorry to hear that. That just kind of stinks. But that's one of those things. You just live to learn and learn to live, and you can pass it along to all our listeners that always do your flight control checks before you take off.
Every time. Every time. Jeez.
Yeah. Even if you come down, that was one of the things you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, is that you were saying that, people will comment, hey, you just flew that airplane. Why are you doing it again? And I'll tell you that it's on every checklist, every flight. As soon as you come back on the ground, you want to redo it because you never know. Something may have changed.
Well, I mean, I'm sure if you go through your repertoire of you flying, especially other people's airplanes or a plane that you had that was maybe had a slight mishap or was acting wonky or something, and let me get in there, and you're messing with the controls, or you're reinserting the servos back into the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
You ever had that or maybe one was pulling out, or you're trying to get to the battery or trying to get to something, and you might have pulled a couple of the things out, and you're pushing them back in, and you're like, okay, let's go.
Yep.
And who knows what you've stuck them in?
I mean, I've actually had an incident where I caught the servo. I just flew the airplane. Somehow, whatever I did while I was up there stripped the servo. And when I came down, I plugged the no battery in. I was taxiing out. As soon as I got to the runway, I went, wink, wink. What? Why isn't that moving? And, and then the L-39 incident. We actually talked about a podcast when Mike was flying. That was way back when we were talking about the abort. He didn't understand what that meant. Because I saw that the flap was not down. One flap was and one flap was not. And it was one of those things that it was not that way, I mean, we just flew that airplane, and I checked it all. Something that we normally do is take off with or without flaps, but on that particular case, he put the flaps down and only one came down. And what was the problem? The little keeper on the end of the servo came off, and the rod was hanging. So that was the only thing, and I think it happened when we hit a bump or something. So, yep.
I will say that Jim was a good sport about it,
Right.
So,
Sure.
I really do feel bad, but he was a good sport about it, and that plane will fly again. So,
well, we are sorry to hear about that, Jim. I apologize on behalf of Jay. I know that he thinks it's awful. He called me as soon as he left the field and was just like, "You're not gonna believe this." I was always like, I was lamenting the whole way home. I felt bad. I just was like, "Lay it on me, brother. I feel your pain." So, but well, good. I'm glad he's a good sport. He understood, and it's like anything else. It's just a comedy of errors. Well, unfortunately, our hours is up. This blew past, and I love hearing your stories.
Yep.
We'll try to see if we can get AK Mike back on. We appreciate our listeners jumping on the Facebook page and having a discussion. And the more the merrier. Come on out. We love to hear you. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, give that a try too. We're trying to figure out the best video since all of us are in separate locations. We even tried it when I was at your location. It didn't seem to work as well. So a new platform.
Yeah, so we're
trying a new platform.
We're still working out a few of the bugs, folks, so we apologize for that.
Yeah, but we'll get it to work. So if we're missing a YouTube section, we'll try to get to it. But we love hearing from you. Shoot us an email at parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com. And we appreciate your patronage. Other than that, man, it's going to be a quick 2 weeks, and I guess we'll be back, huh?
Yep.
So, well, from Michael here in Arizona.
And Jay from the hills of Texas.
We will see you in 2 weeks.
Let's fly.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.